Well, I went to the University of Aberdeen when I was 17. I was brought up in Glasgow, and I thought I was going to the ends of the earth. And the first thing I remember about the city was it looked like a modern-day Christian Athens, in the sense that there were churches, places of worship, absolutely everywhere. And the astonishing thing was they were all made of this extraordinarily strong, powerful, almost overpowering granite. And they looked truly magnificent. But one of the things I began to notice was that they had very large congregations, but the telltale sign of where they were spiritually was that their annual givings were published and they were appalling. This was a city to which Samuel Rutherford, the great Scottish theologian and pastor, had been exiled in the 17th century. This was a city where the influence of John Knox had reached at the time of the Reformation. But in the previous 200 years, maybe 100 years before I became a student there, the rot had set in very deeply. The influence of the Enlightenment in Scotland, ultimately the rejection of Scripture and the gospel. With the result that, and I suppose somebody with discernment could have predicted this, that buildings that looked magnificent as recently as the 1960s would now be nightclubs or disco centres or upmarket apartment buildings, because the gospel had vanished internally in those buildings. And now it was obvious looking at them from the outside that the gospel had also vanished externally. And so in many ways, those buildings are a kind of living parable of what has happened to the church in Scotland. But it has fallen into decay. It's like a ruined castle. And it is in desperate need of new resurrections to take place in churches. One of the hopeful signs of that is that there are living churches coming to the birth and growing to maturity in Scotland. And in my own view, one of the brightest lights of all those churches is Trinity Church in Aberdeen, a group of people who had the courage to leave the mainline church, leave their building, leave the comforts for the sake of Christ and the gospel. And that church is pastorally led by my friend David Gibson. Both my wife and I have been richly blessed by his ministry of the word. And I am very, very hopeful because they have their eyes set on the resurrection of an old building that will serve the gospel well in Aberdeen and be a real lighthouse throughout the country with tremendous potential for the future. I'm very, very hopeful that the Lord's people will support this congregation in every possible way to see the beginnings of the fruition of their vision for a new beginning of the ministry of the gospel and the creation of a real church family in Trinity and Aberdeen. And from my own point of view, that to me is one of the single most important things for gospel witness in Scotland, that there be church families that remind people of what life was really meant to be and what life can actually become through faith in Jesus Christ. So I see Trinity Church as both a sign of hope, the beginnings of a new building of true granite in the people of God as they seek to serve Him together.